The proceeding will start
I really like potatoes so much.
Order. Good morning and welcome everyone to our second public session on developing AI capacity and expertise in defence. My name's Emma Lowell-Buck and I'll be chairing today's session. If I just ask the rest of the committee to introduce themselves and say hello. Jeremy?
Jeremy Quinn. I was on the sign.
As on the sign, and Richard. Gavin Robinson.
Jesse Norman, hello.
Thank you. And if it's okay to ask our panellists just to introduce themselves and say a little bit about what your organisation's involved in currently in defence and AI. If you want to start, Neil.
Yes, good morning. Neil Morphett. I'm from Lockheed Martin UK, the Rotary Mission Systems Division. Lockheed Martin is obviously a worldwide defence and security organisation. The groups do everything from fighter aircraft to transport to space systems, rockets, munitions, defence systems. The group I'm in is everything from helicopters to ship and submarine combat systems, sensors, training, logistics systems, cyber and special effects. And we also do some commercial work with civil organisations such as post offices, which has probably used more AI in those than we have in defence for, certainly in the UK for so far. In the UK, programmes that we're involved with, things like Merlin Maritime Helicopter. We do work for post offices around the world. We do training and logistics systems. We're partners with Babcock on the military flight training system, which has got some AI in some of the training devices. We have some maritime navigation systems. We have cyber and electromagnetic support for various other government departments, which have got some emergent AI capabilities coming through. And I'm sure there are things that we do that I've forgotten, but we do things like supporting F-35 in the UK and other army programs with logistics support systems, which have got some emergent AI capabilities. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you, Neil. Dr. Harwood?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to speak to you today. Me personally, a bit of an unusual career, always within defence, but I've had 10 years government, 10 years industry, and 10 years academia. So the way we talk about this sort of triple helix of bits, and I was even for my sins a district councillor for a while, so please excuse me for that. But looking at things in a sort of slightly different way. Leonardo itself, I think what's important for the committee to understand today is we are effectively data providers. So we build sensors, we build systems that collect data. That data is then taken and used in certain ways in order to make decisions, to generate knowledge, to allow things to happen. You'll all be familiar with the OODA loop in that sense. Leonardo itself, nowhere near as big as sort of Lockheed Martin. I think we're about 7th in the world, about 13 to 15 billion. Obviously, as the name suggests, Italian heritage company, but we clearly are a UK company. About 8,000 people on shore, supporting 10,000 people directly through the company across the 9 locations spread across Scotland and England. In that sense, just having opened a new Defence Artificial Intelligence Centre, for example, up in Newcastle, up in the northeast, and looking to do more in terms of what we're doing there. But just really coming back to looking at the data lineage and then taking that from a cyber electromagnetic effect type perspective. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. So as you'll be aware, there's lots of documents, statements, strategies and units set up from a government level around defence AI. But what I'm curious about is how clearly are they communicating to industry what kind of AI capabilities that they want to develop in government?
I'll go first. So the defence AI strategy is actually a very clear document. It's very comprehensive, it's very thorough. There's probably a few areas we would probably like to see more attention on it. And the focus on early experimentation, getting out, having a play with AI is very thorough. I think what we're not seeing to the extent we'd like is how is it going to make it into operational service in full capital projects, frontline platforms, frontline systems, even to an extent kind of the back office enterprise systems. So yes, we're seeing a lot of experimentation right now. The strategy recommends or is considering mandating AI-ready in future capital projects. That might be a bit of a leap because no one's going to know what AI ready means. But having future programs define what they're expecting to do with AI, what provision they're making for future AI, is something I think we'd like to be seeing in the roadmaps going forward, so that we in industry can know what to prepare for, what we can engage the SME and academic community on, because at the moment they can come in with a bright idea, and then the gestation period for it to make it to a major program and get delivered out is so long that they can't sustain the interest and need to move on. And same with people joining as a career. It's a long gestation period in defence, and I think we'd like to see more of a roadmap as to how these things are going to get into service, so that we can prepare for it and aim to deliver those.
Howard?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's 5 or 6 main things that we're looking at, and you sort of feed down from the National AI Strategy to the Defence AI to the Playbook, DSTL's Biscuit Book's really useful, the Army AI Strategy and so forth. But, policy and strategy are just that. They're a destination where you wish to get to. I don't think it's useful having documents that don't necessarily refer to one another, and there's overlap and duplication in sort of what they're saying. But you can take any policy across government and look at the coherence in terms of between different documentation and the reference, sort of the flow down within them. As my colleague said, it's about really how do we deploy the infrastructure, and how do government intend to engage with industry in order to make that vision a reality for what we're doing. My expertise, obviously we do an enormous amount of work in AI, but it's how do you take disruptive technology and how do you put that into the field? How do you get that operationally through the system? And when you look at what other governments are doing in terms of the levels of investment, hundreds of millions, billions of pounds, and the related technologies such as semiconductors, processing power, and things like that, it is those things I think that the policy needs to focus on. What is the execution plan that the policy sort of define? So it's about deploying the infrastructure to support AI, and then looking at the biggest barrier to innovation. I say this all the time. The biggest barrier to innovation are the commercial models that government use in order to develop and deploy new technology. If we can overcome that, and then we look at the budget, so there's no point taking £1 million budget and splitting it 2 million ways and giving everybody 50 pence in order to do it. You've got to have a focused effort on what you want to do if we want to achieve the scale of what we want to do. As I said, the playbook's really good, that it sort of says, here's some of the scenarios that we've got, these are the sort of things we want to achieve. I think the establishment of the Defence Artificial Intelligence Centre is an excellent initiative, and if one thing stands above others, it is that will add some clarity to the direction that we've got. And the last thing I'll sort of make, and I'll keep repeating this point as we go forwards, we can't just class industry as one thing. There seems to be a preoccupation in many instances of focusing on the funny acronym SME, and I never know whether that means small to medium enterprise or subject matter expert. But, industry is not industry. We are primes, and we're blessed to be in that position, and then there are small to medium enterprises, and I think often, the relationship between us, there's never been a strategy about what is the relationship between industry primes and small to medium enterprises, and that would be very helpful in exploiting this particular instance, because when I look at where we're spending our money on artificial intelligence, we're spending it with, interestingly, some of the people that are sitting behind me today, in terms of what you would class as small and medium enterprises in that artificial intelligence space, because this is somewhere where you've got to be agile, and typically with companies like ours, for valid purpose, we're very regimented and structured in terms of governance and so forth. So in sort of summary, the documentation does a good job of saying what is the destination we want to achieve, but there's a whole host of things that are needed in order to deliver that aspiration, including funding, commercialisation, infrastructure and so forth, to deliver it. Thank you.
I think Gavin Robson, did you want to come in?
Thank you. I think it's a helpful opener from you both, and I suppose, Simon, you've just mentioned challenges and things that we don't have knowledge of, or direction as to where we're going. Neil, you'd mentioned about how the strategy was a comprehensive document. Last week we took some evidence in an earlier session which highlighted 2 frailties. One, that the strategy itself talked about future AI 18 months ago, and things that we've now seen deployed in Ukraine. We've seen progress at an exponential rate. and secondly that it's devoid of action plan, devoid of transparency around an action plan or the matrices in which we mark or measure progress. So just at this stage of the session, if the chairs agree, we'll just be interested to hear your reflections as to whether you see that as a deficit within the strategy, questions around the need for refresh in the strategy, or whether you think the architecture is right and that it'll allow the enablement for future development within that overall architecture as it stands. So maybe Neil first and then Simon.
We can have a debate about which document it should be in. I echo Simon's point that more obvious linkage would be better. I think the strategy probably does a good job as it stands at the moment. Where it sort of leaves it open is, okay, what are the individual programs? What are the frontline commands? What is the major delivery that will actually give us proper operational capability? How is that going to happen? Because we still see programs coming out literally today, and if we went through a current major tender or something looking for the words AI or AI provision or AI roadmap or per day or future, it might not say it at all. And some of these systems are going to be in service 20, 30, 40 years. If when we are doing a future action and we want to deploy what have previously been UORs or now urgent capability requirements, you want to be, in an ideal world, I suppose, sending an AI model out over Defence Digital, and it will land in a platform and it will be flying the next morning doing, with that new capability. Right now there is no roadmap to do that, and the platforms and the systems aren't being designed to enable that to happen. So in 10 years' time, when we're trying to do that, the answer is probably a plethora of laptops around a command room with everyone emailing data files around, and everything takes a few days to work. So I think the strategy is good. I think the next demand signal is, okay, what are the individual programs doing to make that happen in their particular space, particular domain, particular program, particular line of development? I mean, I'm probably going to focus too much on the equipment line of development, but how will training work? Logistics, how will that work? And we've war-gamed out how will training work in future. So the Royal Navy today, when it's doing air defence training, goes down to the southwest approaches. Up comes what used to be the Hawks out of Caldrose, but is now some commercial business jets out of Bournemouth, and they come in and they're the aggressor, and they come in and pretend to be a missile, and they have pods to look like an enemy missile. Today, that works fine because it's a blob on a radar. The crew says, I think this is suspect. They go do their stuff. Imagine in the AI world, the AI is plugged into Defence Digital. It says, well, I can see the blob on the radar, but I've been tracking that thing since it left Bournemouth Airport, and it's been squawking commercial IFF codes for the last hour. The pilot's name is Bob. He was at Alton Towers last week, according to Facebook. For the last 20 minutes it stopped squawking and it's pretending to be a missile, but it's friendly. Don't go and engage that thing. So the world is going to change. I think some of those adjacent doctrines could do with thinking ahead to what the world will look like when that's a capability, because I think they're going to get surprised by it, and that's without even starting on the certification, accreditation, governance community, which is probably going to be very phobic.
Do you have anything to add? Or?
Yeah. I spend my days talking about buzzwords, of which artificial intelligence is one of a list of current ones. I mean, we are doing data fusion, we are doing advanced machine learning, we are doing large data, we are doing a huge lot of things. It depends what you mean, and the DSTL Biscuit book sort of explains this really well, is that we've been doing software development for years. The move into generative artificial intelligence is the next generation of, in simple terms, letting the computer, write some code in order to make a sort of decision. And in order to do that, I'm afraid it's great to get some stories in the press about the impressive things that artificial intelligence can do. But if we're going to deploy this effectively, it's about doing the boring things really well. It's about the governance, it's about the structure, it's about the skills, the people, and sort of so on. And I mean, if the one big question, post Levine for me is who's in charge? Is it the Army? Is it the Navy? The Air Force? Stratcom? Special Forces? Department of Science, Innovation and Technology? You don't buy AI. You buy a system that has AI within it, unless we're going to change the sort of procurement system. And the good work that Stratcom's doing under General Jim, and others around the formation of the Integration Design Authority in order to set standards in terms of what we're doing, I think is a good sort of first step down that pathway of getting the relevant ecosystem in place to do that. We need, again, as I said before, to work with the likes of DSTL, Future Capability Group down in DE&S and others in order to set up that infrastructure. And don't forget, the key thing here is about the move from machine learning to artificial intelligence, is the ability to train the data. And that's where the big risks come if that data has bias within it or it hasn't been developed in a similar way. And clearly we work in a very classified world in many instances, and the type of data we're using isn't widely available, or rather hasn't been captured at the moment in the right format that we need in order to train the AI models. So we then ask the questions of, well, what's the synthetic data? Is the synthetic data we use, is it good? Has it been validated? Again, coming back to who's in charge. So again, in summary there, Integration Design Authority, Stratcom, setting those standards, really good piece. A little bit, with the greatest respect, of incoherence between the different frontline commands in who's doing what, and we would, I think, probably be better together than apart in that sense in what we're doing. And then, the ability, again, of just what is a significant sum and how do you contract and buy this. I hope that answers the question.
Eric Twigg?
Yeah, thanks for that. Interesting you've talked about money before. I had an answer to a parliamentary question yesterday which says they haven't got a clue what they're spending on AI. So they're working on it at the moment to see whether they can better understand it. So maybe that says something about it. I think the obvious question to you, given your experience, is whether the MOD is AI ready. It's different than a strategy and a policy. And I suppose the sub-question which fits in with what Dr. Hayward you just mentioned then is whether what's happening in the MOD, and I think you sort of alluded to it, is basically the Army, Navy and Air Force are working in a silo in terms of AI and would be a lot better working together. And do you think that, if you take that as read, then is that holding us back significantly from moving forward on AI? So the question is, are the AI ready? Is the fact that each service is working in a silo apparently holding us back from being AI ready?
On with you.
Are we AI ready? I mean, that's a very, very difficult question.
Are we more ready than our potential
answer.
Adversaries, for instance?
Yeah. Are we putting in place through the policy and doctrine and all the things we talked about before the building blocks to be at a point at which we can successfully roll out AI technology? Yes, I sort of think we are heading in the right direction. We understand the policy, the Bletchley Declaration and elements like that are all good bits. But it's how fast. It's like asking me if, I don't know if you run the London Marathon, are you ready to run the London Marathon? Well, you might be the guy at the front that can run it in nearly 2 hours, and you might be the guy at the back where they're sweeping up after you 6 hours later. I mean, where are we in that race, frankly, in terms of the investment and level we're making? We're a good amateur. I would have said we're not at the professional pack at the front, but we're definitely a good amateur, and that's to do with the scale and level of investment. Don't get me wrong, some of these amateurs can perform really well, but it's about how serious are we about this. And I come back to the fact is that, are we spending enough on artificial intelligence? Is you don't buy AI.
We don't know.
You buy systems that contain code that has artificial intelligence with them. And maybe I don't want to be sort of misinterpreted. I mean, the forces, the frontline commands, of course, do work together. But because you buy individual bits of equipment, there is no necessarily any core system. So you look at Strike Network or Nexus or any of these software architectures that they've got across the individual commands. That's where interoperability and the use of that. The other thing, of course, comes down to processing power, whether you're processing that on the jet, on the plane, on the ship, on the submarine, or whether you're doing that sort of back at the other front end. And we've got a huge number of, careful with my terms here, we've got an issue around supply chain in terms of things like semiconductors and other things like that, in order to have the sufficient levels of processing and compute power that we need in order to effectively get artificial intelligence to work when deployed. Have I helped answering that?
That's fine. And Mr. Morphett.
Yeah, I suspect the reason the authorities don't know how much they spend on AI, it's probably if you ask the same question about how much you're spending on software, it's not, I mean, maybe it is, but I don't think the authority captures the metrics that says this fraction of it is on AI versus software versus any other part of the system. To to your wider question of is the authority AI ready, I'll echo Simon's point of, define ready, but probably the answer is no. There are bits of it, and it's quite sporadic, that are sort of AI literate and have aspirations to get smart on it and are on the journey to do so. There are probably quite a lot of areas which are, if it all went away, they'd be quite happy about it because it's a problem they don't have to deal with, and probably getting the mindset over from this is why we can't do this to this is how we will do this is probably the key focus. So I think having individuals feeling like they're empowered to go and work out how we are going to certify an AI literate, an AI ready platform. How is the commercial infrastructure going to work on something which is definitely going to be updated regularly? It's not a fire and forget project where you buy it and you're done. You are going to want to keep it going through life. You are going to want to engage with the supplier. The supplier is going to want to feed that product to other people. How does the IP work? It might have been their initial design, but it's had a load of MOD data into it. How is that going to work? So I think having people working out how they're going to solve that, rather than perhaps resisting it happening, is maybe the journey that MOD needs to go on.
I think Mark Francois wanted to come in then. Jeremy
Just a
Quinn?
quick follow-up, if I may. Because the MOD is so bureaucratic, if you want to get something changed, you either need the strong support of ministers or at least a 4-star officer these days to drive something. So who's in charge? When it comes to AI, is there actually a champion in the department? Is it the head of Stratcom? Is it the vice chief? Who, if anyone, has picked up this challenge and is driving it? Or is, as I think you're suggesting, the effort well-meaning but highly atomised? Dr. Harwood. It's not a trick question.
No. I just don't want to trip myself up. I mean, each of the commanders in the frontline commands will take obviously clear personal responsibility. Where does it roll up? Probably General McGowan through FMC would be the logical place in which it would do. But then obviously we know about the Grand Canyon and Valleys of Death down at the sort of DE&S end. So it comes back to what I said about the development. We can do some great research and development upstream. A contract is issued, and because that's the time, cost and performance, there isn't really time for innovation within that contract because, agile technology like we're talking about here doesn't fit well in terms of development. So I would have said overall, I think it's atomised. I like that word. I think it is atomised. There isn't a clear lead within it. If you look at who's in the DACE-X, it is Future Capability Group, which frankly I think is a fantastic model. I will say that. I think what the team are doing down there in D&S at FCG about prototyping the technology and getting it out pre-concept is fantastic. Defence Digital obviously as part of Stratcom and then DSTL within that. But if you look at the three organisations in DACE-X, Stratcom, DSTL and FCG, a component of DE&S, you've got to sort of ask the question, well, where are the other commands?
This is extremely helpful because this is sort of my point. I mean, to be fair to DE&S, they've got the Avon Gorge down at Bristol, but I think the Valley of Death's probably a bit harsh. But it is atomised, isn't it? And General McGowan's given evidence to this committee multiple times. He's a highly capable officer, but he's arguably got one of the busiest jobs in the entire department as Fin Mill Cap. He probably, even with the best will in the world, doesn't have the bandwidth to drive AI, given all the other plates he's trying to spin, to mix metaphors. Do we need, if we're really going to make the most of this, because as a committee we're told our potential enemies are exploiting this very heavily, if we're going to reply in kind or better, don't we need someone at the centre who is empowered, with a directive from the Secretary of State to really bang heads together and make something of this?
I would say,
and if we do, who should that person be?
I'd say very quickly, apologies, just to jump in to answer that question.
We'd like Mr. Morphett's view as well. So.
Absolutely, sorry. So General McGowan has taken an absolutely fantastic approach to collaboration within industry, and it's sort of in my 30 years of sort of doing this, 25, 30 years of doing this, the openness with which General McGowan and the team share and collaborate with industry is absolutely fantastic and a game changer. Ironically, and it's funny you should mention that, but the gentleman over here was one of my first bosses in MOD. Philip was in charge of DEC CCII, the Command Control Information Infrastructure Department of Equipment Capability at the time. And that DEC structure, which sat under the predecessor of Future Military Capability, the DEC structure was really good in taking control of bigger capabilities like this. So there were the two DECs, DEC CCII and DEC ISTAR, and then you had the 9 Directors of Equipment Capability on equipment procurement. And what DEC CCII and DEC ISTAR's job was to do...
There's a risk of slightly drowning us in acronyms. Could you just...
Absolutely.
Just spell out what those organisations are?
The predecessor of the current Future Military Capability, FMC organisation, was what we called the DECs, the Directors of Equipment Capability. There were 11 DECs, Directors of Equipment Capability, that were responsible for, as the word suggests, capability areas. Within those capability areas, they clearly had procurement, but there were 2 cross-cutting DECs, DEC CCII, Command Control and Information Infrastructure, and ISTAR, obviously, of which we know what that stands for. And their jobs were to look at the overall capability in a domain. With the Levine and the move to the frontline commands, we don't really have those capability functions sitting in the centre. And it was an excellent model, and I think it's something that we've lost. And going back to something like that, he says humbly, was, in my personal opinion, I think that worked pretty good, and that was 20 so years ago.
That's very helpful, Mr. Morphett.
So there is an organisation called the Defence AI Unit, which owns the Defence AI Centre and other of the sort of the empowering activities like the Digital Foundry. So I think the expertise in there is the empowerment, is sort of the senior champion in there. I don't know. I suspect not. Is it a role that should be formed, or is there an existing role that should take this on? Don't think I'm in a good position to comment. What we tend to find is these things really do bend around the character and personality of the person put in that role. You get the real visionary in the role who corrals everyone and drives it forward.
I'm sorry, I'm being slow. Remind me where the Defence AI Centre is located.
If it has a physical presence somewhere, I don't know where it is, but it's an organisation that is...
That's a bit worrying if you don't know.
Well, we have a Lockheed AI centre, but it's scattered all over the UK and in the cloud and in the US. So the good news is it doesn't...
You know where yours is. I mean, I'd like to know that you
if
do
there's
where
a physical
these
desk
are.
somewhere, I genuinely don't know where it is. I mean, perhaps I should. But they are the people running organisations such as the Digital Foundry. So this is the idea of...
All right, just quickly, what rank is the person in charge of the Defence AI Centre?
I would have to look it up. I know the Defence AI Centre is Commodore, Navy Commodore.
1-star officer?
1 star.
All right. I think the word atomised perhaps isn't entirely inappropriate. Anyway, thank you, Chair.
Right, Jeremy Quinn.
Very quickly, Chair, thank you. In response to Derek's questions regarding readiness for AI, actually both of you were very focused on the paper and the policy and the direction of travel as announced by the MOD. It was only towards the end of your answer, Simon, that you referred to processing power. And I've just wondered if there are sort of 2 or 3 areas where the MOD just needs to up its game, if you'd like to point in those directions. I'm not talking, the policy could be perfect, but it's more than that. So the questions I have is the cloud and processing power, is the collection of data. So it's all wonderful saying we're going to move to AI, but across government there's lots of stuff that isn't even done digitally. So how you do AI if you haven't got the raw data is a problem. So is that something the armed forces are good at or bad at, and do they need to do more? And the third thing is culture. Is there a risk that everyone across the armed forces is saying we've got these brilliant people doing AI and they're in a box over there, but actually what we need to have for AI to be properly addressed is to be a culture throughout the services about how they're going to be collecting the data and making and seizing the opportunities?
Yeah, well, there are 5 things, if I may, rather than sort of 3 particularly, only which 2 are technological. So I hate to sound like a broken record, but number 1 is people, and SQEP are suitably qualified and experienced people, and we're competing with every other industry. that wants to implement and use AI, advanced machine learning sort of technologies, and that is something that there are 1,000,001 working groups on, but we never seem to come up with a problem. Number two is data, as you mentioned, and that's availability primarily, I think, of the training data at this point. And again, there's this fine balance between understanding the system that you are trying to implement artificial intelligence on and being an expert in artificial intelligence, and they're not necessarily the same thing. So there's the people, and then it's the data with the people in order to interpret that data in the right way. The third thing, as you said, is digital technology, I'll generically refer to, which includes HPC, so high performance compute, and the ability to process on the edge, which links to things like semiconductors, communications, quantum, another buzzword, and things like that, free space optical communications. There's then a massive thing around liability, commercial and legal repercussions of what we are doing here, and the ability need to have that. And then linked very closely to that is regulation and governance around explainable AI, V&V, verification and validation. So there's the 5 things, only which of 2 are technology.
That's great. Thank you. It's very clear. Thank you.
Norman?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I just wanted to go back to some of the things that you've said already and put a little bit of context. So obviously everyone's obsessed now with ChatGPT in the general public, and there's a natural reaction from the pros to say, we've been doing machine learning all these years, and let's not just put AI on top of things and pretend it's anything enormously new. But there is something new, obviously, qualitatively. That's what we're wrestling with. Now, Defence AI strategy was published in June 22. ChatGPT didn't come out until November 22. So there's a massive change in the kind of public sense of what the capabilities of AI and generative AI in particular could be. And we've had evidence that it could be even closer than some of the kind of wildest estimates, a matter of a relatively small number of years away before we start to see activity in that area. And there's an enormous amount of public capital, private capital going into this area. Now, so the question is, so one of you talked about incoherence in the MOD, and I want to explore a little bit about what that incoherence might be, because we're struggling to put ships, and aircraft carriers to sea at the moment using very ancient technology. The idea that we're able to, that we've got a defence establishment that's AI savvy or AI ready seems to me risible. So I'd be very interested in your thoughts on that in particular, and then I want to explore, if I may, a little bit more about the idea of a platform and the way in which you think AI ought to be procured. So can you just talk a little bit about sources of incoherence and capability, and I'm not, just in whatever terms that can give it some flesh and detail for us.
So coherence needs to be designed in from the start. Every program we're working on with, let's say, the Navy or the Army or the Air Force individually, they are predominantly focused on how do we interoperate with our own service. And at some point, someone will go, well, how do I interoperate with the, if I'm the Fleet Air Arm, how do I interoperate with the Royal Air Force? They may well say, actually, we interoperate with the US Navy more than we interoperate with the Royal Air Force. But it will get a little bit stuck, because the problem of just getting, if we're focusing on AI, what are we going to do with AI I'll follow the example of the Fleet Air Arm, what is that going to look like? And before you go too far, well, what is the US Navy doing, what is the Royal Air Force doing? They are doing 2 different things. So we kind of need to pick a path of trying to jam the 2 together and hope NATO or whoever puts some standards out there.
So we could theoretically end up with a situation where we're, as it were, might it be fair to say, the kind of the extension, and possibly not the favoured extension, of a US airborne AI strategy without necessarily having some of the controls that we would expect.
Potentially, or a European one. All of these things come with their own balance of who are we going to interoperate with. Yes, we can always do our own, and we have a history of kind of doing our own and then realising a few years later that we've come up with yet a third standard, a third architecture that doesn't work with anybody else's. So after a while, it's, well, I've got this platform I developed to my standard, but it really also needs to work with the US or NATO or Europeans, and you end up having 2, and eventually the UK one dies, and it was a nice initiative, but actually it probably would have been better to sit down at the start and say, who are we going to work with? Let's have a common architecture that we work with those, and get in at the start with them.
You're not sensing that common architecture is being discussed adequately at the moment as between NATO, US and European allies?
I think as a collection of them, no. I think there are lots of bilateral discussions going on. So the AUKUS framework has a vast potential to get those countries on a common framework. As a company, we work very closely with our US colleagues, our Australian colleagues, Canadians as well. So those 4 nations, from an industry point of view, actually work very well. So do the defence departments. And if an initiative coming out of AUKUS is let's have a common AI standard as part of AUKUS Pillar 2 that says everyone is going to subscribe to this standard, and if you need little local variations, they are local variations, they are not completely opposing approaches, that will be a great thing to come out of AUKUS, because at the moment AUKUS is kind of a bit like it comes across a bit like a larger version of the UK AI policy, which is, well, let's try and do everything. Let's pick some things to get all the way through first to exercise the whole system before we try and boil the ocean.
Right, obviously, when we get to Tempest, thinking of AI and airborne systems, we'll have to include Japan as well. So the natural extension of this platform starts to become, as it were, really quite global. Okay, so do you have a comment on this, Dr. Harwood?
Well, yeah, a couple of points. I mean, I think, we have to, as you understand, we have to be very careful when talking about AI. AI in large language models is somewhat different. We use AI in large language models and we use AI for data and sensor fusion as well. So I guess that's the first thing to say. And just to answer your question sort of specifically, there's effectively 2 approaches to AI models. You either build your own or you take somebody else's. And in large complex procurement systems, if you lay out the scenario that you've laid out there, is if we're late to the party, we might just have to adopt somebody else's. And of course, whilst that has many benefits, you don't know how it's been trained. You don't know how it's been deployed in that sense unless you get into the real weeds of it, and then still it's sort of difficult to do. So do we want to build our own? Or do we want to deploy somebody else's? And in international collaborations, that sort of may be
the preference. Do you think we should be taking one approach or the other, and which one should we?
I'm a Brit. I would much rather we build our own.
but that's precisely the point that Neil's made, that we can't do really based on history.
I'll take a middle ground. The lower level, before it's trained, the fundamental AI engine, if you like, the raw app, that is something that can be exported around different countries, and you can train it locally using your own data. So you have, I would say, the best of both worlds. You have a balance between the 2 worlds. In an ideal world, you'd have it trained with all the data from all of the allies, so that there is one best-of-breed system that's got all the information in it, versus here's the UK one that's really good at picking up this sort of thing. The US one's really good at those. Well, do you put both of them in the computer and one will see it and one will see the different thing, and between them they'll get the solution? It sounds inefficient. But we've certainly looked at, as a US parent company, the US is pouring a huge amount of money into AI. How do we in the UK get access to it? We don't want to reinvent our own because the company's going to pay for the same investment twice. But if we can get the basic engines from the US, and we have, I can literally go on my phone right now and get the basic engines that we have a copy of on our server farm in, I generally physically don't know where it is, I think it's in New Jersey. We have access to that. We can't get access to the training data and the sort of the finished model, but I can go and take it to the Wintermute exercises the British Army runs and go and train it with pictures of Russian tanks banging around Salisbury Plain, and I can train it to recognise tanks.
Okay.
So different
I can hand back in a second, but just talking about platforms. So there seems to be a kind of model evolving within defence AI circles that, we're really talking about systems, and sitting underneath these, ideally, would be a platform that unites the uses of systems or different systems together in some way, ideally with a single engine, consolidated data sets of the kind you described. That would then, it's kind of an iPhone view of the world, right? You then periodically patch it from time to time, and there's very high levels of interoperability, and people can write different programs and submit them to some quality assessment program process before uploading into the system, into the network. Is that how you're broadly thinking of it?
Yeah, I mean, the iPhone analogy is an interesting one. I mean, it's more iOS than it is iPhone. iPhone's the thing, and iOS is the operating system that sort of sits within it. And that analogy has many weaknesses, but nonetheless, the principle of what you're trying to say.
Also, in a public forum, we're trying to get our hand around something people can get their heads around.
But just to reassure you, you mentioned Tempest before, but look at the bigger program, GCAP, the Global Combat Air Program, is, please be reassured, within, we've got a thing called ISANKI, the Integrated Sensing and Non-Kinetic Effects element, which is what the UK is investing in. For GCAP, and we're doing a lot of work. You may have seen publicly we did the Leonardo Combat Air AI Challenge recently, where we're looking at deep reinforcement learning and integrated sensor fusion. Some of the companies, again, and other small to medium enterprises fed into that. So we are doing a significant amount of work on what you would clarify as the platform in order to be sort of world leaders in that. Again, I just keep coming back to the fact is, what is enough? What is enough in order to be spent, and at what time period and at what epoch do we want to deploy that capability? So we are doing lots of amazing and fantastic work, and I don't want the committee to leave thinking that we're not doing a lot of cutting edge stuff. It's just from a personal perspective, we could do a lot more, and we could do a lot more quickly if there was more time, money, investment, commercial elements in terms of.
But the point, sorry, just I want to insert, but the point that Neil made about strategic risk of incoherence and lack of interoperability would still remain. That's going to. There's a governance and a driving of change and in procurement challenge that is being articulated there as well.
There is a need for a coherent architecture, a sort of almost a system design approach for the whole thing, even if individual services are only kind of living in part of it. A platform that can run multiple AI systems from multiple places is not necessarily a bad thing. I mentioned earlier we do commercial work for the postal services. We recognise envelopes. We read the address and read the stamp. We actually have banks of different AI engines in there that we've got. Some are ours, some are from third-party vendors, some are from the customer, and we throw the image at all of them. And we know over time that these are really good at handwriting, these are really good at text. You can translate that into, a defence environment says, we know these things are really good at picking out tanks, these are really good at picking out small surface contacts in a maritime environment, these are really good at picking up RF signals in the ether. Providing they're all sitting there on the same platform and you can deploy them all, versus this one needs, and let's jump analogies from a moment, this one needs to be running on Android, this one needs to be running on Apple. If they're all sitting there on the same infrastructure, and Defence Digital, there's no reason it can't deliver that says next time we're in somewhere like a Camp Bastion, literally someone says, I've got a new threat out there, it's I don't want to make one up. We've got a new threat. Someone back at base can come up with a new engine that can detect it. It goes out overnight. It's on the system. It's running the next day, and it's already got access to all the data. You can train it overnight on this wealth of data that we've already got because it's the same format as we've trained everything else on. And it may do well on some things or weak on others, but all that, the hard stuff, the infrastructure, the connectivity to the sensors, all that legacy data that is currently sitting in disk drives, in cupboards, in bits of MOD, all that's out in the open. We can throw it all at the new models and train them very quickly. So getting a lot of that, as Simon says, a lot of that, the boring stuff out the way. The AI bit sometimes is actually the easy bit. You've done the best bit in 2 weeks. The gestation to get it through into service and get it connected to what it needs to do to actually be useful is the hard bit.
Okay, thank you.
Very much. Hand over to Richard Drax.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. Can I just go further on the point that you touched on, Dr. Harwood, which is the challenge of recruiting and retaining people who have these skills or don't. In the evidence that we've had to date, the picture is a bit bleak. For example, the lack of sufficient STEM graduates has been listed as one. Mm-hmm. A highly competitive world, both in this country and internationally, so keeping people is very difficult. At the Defence AI Centre, a recent job, Deputy Head of Centre, a salary of approximately 60k, a salary which Professor Payne said was not competitive. We also heard that many of the young to mid-career experts now are Chinese, and of course that's a bit controversial and difficult so far as defence is concerned. We've heard from the developing defence AI and working with MOD contributions to the inquiry suggested AI expertise within MOD quote, lags significantly behind academia and the broader UK AI industry. And lastly, we heard some very good evidence from retired Air Marshal Ed Stringer. And he suggested that one of the ways of resolving this issue was to look at the careers and maybe move people from civilian jobs into the military and perhaps vice versa to retain the skills rather than keeping someone in the defence business or in the armed services for all of their career. So the question's really to you, if I can start with you, Neil, first. What is the strategy you've got to attract these talented minds? What specific skills are most difficult to find? And is it true that there is a specific challenge in finding UK nationals to fill these posts?
Okay, so are we experiencing challenges? Yes. Is it a massive problem? Today, no. And the reason it's not a massive problem is because we don't have huge programs of record that are demanding AI. So we are still in that very much experimentation phase of, let's go to this exercise, army warfighting experiment, those sort of things. And we have ample capacity to deal with those. If the customer were to turn around and say, I want to productionise that, deliver it into service, turn it into a massive AI program, yes, we absolutely would. We know where we get good AI graduates from and apprentices. Don't underestimate the apprentice scheme. It's a domain where people can get stuck in very quickly. You don't need to have a graduate degree. There are some good MScs around in AI, but there are all sources of people. The disproportionate overseas student issue you mentioned is a problem. Yes, clearly we're going to need residency requirements and UK nationals for a lot of the programmes, so that brings us down to a smallish proportion of that base. So it needs to be grown, but what there is, where is that talent going when it leaves education? Is it coming to defence? Some of it is. Some of it is going into entertainment, into fintech, into health, into all sorts of other places. I mentioned earlier, is defence an attractive place for someone who is an AI practitioner to come? And the people that we are really interested in is kind of the AI, I'll call them architects, people that understand how it works, people that understand how to get it trained with the right sort of data, understand the weaknesses. You can throw data at an AI engine, it will learn stuff. It might have learnt the wrong stuff, and you won't find out until you realise that every time you train it on a tank, well, the tank's always in a field and it's always pointing right because that's the way the army park them. So, if it's pointing right, it's a tank. People that understand how it works are the people we're really interested in. I'll call it the intellectual payback period for them for come and say, I've got this really bright idea, I've done something exciting that I'd like to show you. I did it over the weekend at home and a bit of scripting and it's brilliant. I threw some data at it I got off the internet. That's fantastic. We might throw some resource at it to get it better and spend some time on it to get it useful and demonstrable. We can take it to an army warfighting experiment and then it'll be great. What are you bringing to us next year? Okay, so the bright ideas guy or girl is going, well, what's the point of me pumping these bright ideas in there and spending my weekend doing this cool stuff if the gestation period to get it out into the hands of the real user is 2 years? If it's a program, if you've got a live program, it's probably 2 years by the time you get through all the testing, certification, safety, doing it properly. If you've got to go to the customer and say, brilliant new idea here, create a business case, get it through scrutiny, get a program established, that's 5 years. That's an awful long return time for someone at the start of their career who's sort of full of brim and vigour and got some great ideas. And I can go to Amazon or Google or the film industry and get this great thing, and it'll be in use in.
I'd really interrupt you. If that is the case, and if I may paraphrase, what you're saying is that people may come up with brilliant ideas outside the MOD and give the MOD a fantastic idea, but by the time it's developed, it's old hat, it's gone, because AI is moving so fast. So how do you keep those skills in the MOD if indeed these individual contributors are no longer wanted after they're given an idea which is no longer developed because it's taken too long to develop? If you follow my
Yes, I do, and I would rephrase it as they're no longer wanted because we would love to keep them. But they may go, I don't feel like my ideas are going anywhere. I can go and feel like I'm getting more intellectual reward out of some other industry. How do you keep them going? Good question. The answer is keep them doing the stuff they like doing. There is a volume of work going on. If that was seconding someone into a command to say, right, go and be the AI person within this project team, within this territorial regiment, in this experimental group, go and take those skills in and use them there and then come back to us and then maybe second somewhere else and bounce around. That's a useful way of keeping that energy and interest up. Otherwise, it's great, you've come in as an AI architect, it's all gone a bit quiet after that demonstration last week. Would you mind going and doing something completely different for a while until we've got more AI work? That's a pretty depressing place for someone who's full of bloom and vigour and has got lots of ideas to bring to the party, that they then atrophy and say, well, I'll go and work in fintech in the city.
So I come back to my colleagues, Mr. Francois' point that you need someone to have more control over the direction of travel, because of each individual silo is getting people full of ideas. Nothing's happening because they all take so long, and you're not necessarily getting the skills or retaining the skills you need. Does it need a sort of a more coordinated approach so far as defence is concerned? Because it just seems to me not to be working very well.
I think it's an absolutely valid point. The clearer that roadmap is, and someone out there can say, if I develop a bright idea here, I can see it going through onto these programs, this new initiative the MOD is doing. I can see it ending up on Tempest. I can see it going into UK exports elsewhere. Great, I can see where my ideas are going. I will keep pushing them into the funnel and following them through, and if I get to bounce around and go and work with the Navy for a little bit and see how it's being used and help pull it through, that can only be a good thing. At the moment, there is too many ways of it stalling during that process.
Thank you. Dr. Harwood.
So my previous job, I used to be the academic advisor to the security minister, and I ran a university department sort of for 8 years. I feel quite passionate about this sort of particular sort of question. So let's start at the start with STEM. So clearly, again, as I've said, you can always have more people doing maths, physics, chemistry, and everything comes back to maths. So, you can incentivise that system at the bottom end. The point I'm trying to make really early on here is a lot of this is out with the control of the Ministry of Defence. This is other departments of state, other departments of government that in order need to incentivise things. You have these come to school days and come and talk about your career. And it's quite funny. If you've got kids at school, which I do, and they appeal for parents to come in and talk about what they do for their careers, try telling them you work in the defence industry. You won't hear back from the school again, I'll tell you that very quickly. It's not PC, talking about that you work in the defence industry. Schools at that STEM age don't like that. I'm being very generic there. I'm sure there are schools that do like it, but that's been my personal sort of experience. UK nationals, we could go on about that sort of all day. Yes, clearly we need them. We need more of them. They need to be trained in order to do that. Obviously, the clearance system, we'll not discuss that in the room today, but the clearance system needs to be much snappier in terms of turning around. The security grade and classification is only going one way, and we need that to do. The big thing about, and we can talk about Gen X, Gen Y, and all these different generations of people, and I think largely they're probably all the same, but there are some idiosyncrasies between the different generations. In defence, we don't help ourselves because we don't tell people what we're actually doing. So when you look at pharma, or you look at automotive, or you look at something else, they see these really exciting careers. Oh, look, I can do Formula One. Oh, look, I can go and put a spaceship on the moon, or I can do something like that. What do you do? Sorry, can't tell you, it's classified. It doesn't help us in terms of that attraction. When we get people, we tend to put them on the same project for many years, lock them in a room with no windows, and don't let them out very often, and they can't tell anybody what they're doing. So again, the point I'm trying to make there is I don't know how you overcome that problem, because it is an inherent issue with the system that we've got. But all I can say in public is, my goodness me, when you get inside the locker and you learn out what we're doing, wow, it is absolutely cutting edge. But we just can't tell anybody that, and that's the big problem that we've got. With respect to your second question about sort of specific skills, I don't get wrapped up particularly about any particular skills, because there aren't enough people coming out of universities with specialist degrees. So what we've got to look at, what are the related skills? Generally, it's data specialists and system engineering. But in order to apply AI, you need to understand how to apply AI, but you also need to understand the systems in which you're applying it to. You referred to moving between, I think it was Ed Stringer mentioned it, we refer to that as a zigzag career or career passporting. And we've had many attempts at career passporting and zigzag careers, but we've never really managed to pull it off. Industry, through the DSF, the Defence Suppliers Forum, and other groups such as that are very, very keen on it. So everybody's leaning forwards, but for a number of reasons we haven't managed to execute that finally. I'll finish on a couple of things. Pay and compensation. Yeah, we're not competitive. Why we're not competitive? Because the government, coming back to my commercial point, runs this scheme called MEAT, Most Economically Advantageous Tender, which means the cheapest person gets the procurement. Okay, and when you're pricing like that, you've obviously got to drive your costs down, and the costs refer ultimately to salary and labour costs, and therefore you're not competitive. So I don't think the cheapest is the best a lot of the time if you want to achieve what you're applying. Finally, I'll sort of finish by saying, coming back to where I started in terms of STEM, apprenticeship schemes. I absolutely love them, and the apprenticeship levy, absolutely love it. From a university perspective, looking at me, classical education is great, but this ability to learn on the job and the apprenticeship levy and the apprenticeship scheme, we've got to go back, look what happened to it, why is it not following through, why is industry not spending as much money, what are the level 6, 7 and 8 apprenticeship schemes that we've got, and avoid the silly headlines that you see in some of the newspapers about fat cats getting paid to do apprenticeships. I mean, it's just not true. It's about on-the-job experience at that top point of the pyramid for learning.
Very quickly, people join the armed forces to fly, to be a soldier, to drive a tank. What if the young were to ask to join the AI department? That would be specifically, as you say, apprentices. They would be less perhaps military-minded, but more AI-minded, and breed them through the system that way.
I would challenge whether they need to join the military. What we need to be is more collaborative between government, industry and academia. You need places where you can co-develop, or the term in the integrated review is co-create. So what we do is, you talk about procurement, you buy a ship, you buy a tank, you buy a submarine. Going back to what we said, you don't buy AI. What we should be doing in order to incentivise and encourage people is to develop prototype systems. So this, it's a software term, but it's agile rather than waterfall. So you don't start on one end and drop off the other. Waterfall, the traditional procurement type approach. It's an agile method of do a bit, test a bit, build a bit, deploy a bit, test a bit. That's the big things we can do. That's what get people excited. That's the visible stuff. That's what James and Gavin and the Future Capability Group are sort of doing. We just need to ramp that up on steroids. We need to look at co-investment. UKRI spends $6 billion a year. Defence is spending about $600 million to $1 billion a year on overall research and development. There's coherence to be sought there. There's many solutions. It's a real opportunity, and you can come from these things and be really negative about it, but we are making a difference. We could just do it even more so.
Thank you.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Harwood and Neil Morphett. If we just pause this committee for a few moments while we swap over to our next panel, please.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is
Morning, welcome. You've already met the committee members. I think you've been sitting in on the previous session. So if just as in our previous panel, if you're happy to introduce yourselves and just say a little bit about what your company does.
So my name is Andrew van der Lem. I lead the defence team within Faculty AI. We're a UK-owned, UK-based AI company, slightly bigger than an SME, about 350 employees. specialising in trying to solve hard problems using AI, and about a quarter of what we do is in the defence space.
Good morning, thank you. My name is Phil Morris. I am Head of Defence AI at Palantir in the UK. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here this morning. Palantir is a software company that delivers AI-enabled capabilities to our users to allow them to make decisions with their data. We have proudly delivered those capabilities to the MOD for the last 15 years, as well as most of the UK's Western allies, including the United States and the armed forces of Ukraine. The capability that we deliver that allows us to be able to bring these cutting-edge technologies to these users can largely be thought of as plumbing, connecting that data that users have access to and allowing them to be able to make decisions from it. There is kind of a plethora of the applications of this type of software, not least that some of the previous witnesses mentioned around enabling a best-of-breed type approach. My background is in science and engineering, and it's that standpoint that I will be bringing to answering the committee's questions this morning.
Good morning, my name is Richard Drake. I'm the GM for Anduril Industries in the UK. Anduril Industries are a defence technology company based upon the thesis of bringing the innovation that Silicon Valley can bring into the defence world. We use combinations of artificial intelligence, computer vision and machine learning and fuse them with hardware to create solutions for our allies and ourselves.
Welcome. Jeremy?
Thank you, Chair. Look, a very, very broad question to open, so broad you could each speak on it for an hour. Please don't.
Yeah, I was just about to say no.
And you into trouble. What do you see as the most likely important advances in defence AI over the next 5 to 10 years? And by all means, 1, 2, 3 points, but if we can cap it on there. Start any way you like. And Phil, do you want to start first then?
Yes.
Andrew, then Richard.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for the question. So I will avoid future prediction because we all wanted flying cars and ended up with 140 characters as a text limit on Twitter. So I will perhaps avoid kind of that type of domain. But I would say that very specifically, AI will bring the ability to make critical decisions more effectively and much faster using the breadth of the data that the analysts, officers, senior leaders should have access to. What one kind of analogy I would give you there is to think of anyone with a decision-making capacity in the MOD. So from a kind of a new analyst all the way through to a senior leader or even the Chief of the Defence Staff can think of the capability that AI could bring them as each one of those people having an army of 1,000 interns. So if you imagine every single decision maker in the MOD having that army of 1,000 interns, their ability to move through even simply just kind of procedural and process-based work would kind of significantly improve. I say interns versus experts or kind of subject matter expertise as the capabilities are currently at a state whereby you would want to check that work. Those interns will do diligent work for you, but you're unlikely to pass it out unsighted and make a critical decision off the back of it before you have perhaps had an eye over it or existed as a human in that loop to determine whether that is an output that you wish to deliver. However, if you then take that a step forward and think about the amount of procedural and process-based work that the armed services personnel conduct every single day, the amount of sit reps and assess reps, the amount of engineering plans or build plans, whatever it may be, whether it's in main building down the road or in Rosyth shipyard or in a kind of a more sensitive intelligence hub, the ability for those individuals to be powered by advanced capability is obviously not just a benefit for the MOD and its outputs, but also the quality of life of those individuals. And so therefore the speed at which they're able to get through their work and spend their time doing analysis rather than processing, that opportunity to certainly every single decision maker in the MOD is immense. And really we should be thinking about, with respect to some of the questions in the previous session around kind of how do we best silo or centralize, or should we AI, thinking of AI in that sense around everyone having an army of 1,000 interns, as it being an embedded technology across the full spectrum of effects that the MOD provides, whether that is from warfighting in the kind of operations space all the way through to legal and policy in the kind of the J8, J9 type space. I'm conscious of time there, as you said, there's hours worth of stuff to talk about. So,
well, that's very kind. So the bottom line to your answer is this is the most extraordinary enabler we gave you the opportunity to gaze into a crystal ball and say it can do this and this and this, and instead, perfectly reasonably, you said anything involving process, it is an enabler that will speed up and make more efficient all of those processes. But is there anything, Andrew or Richard, wish to add to that response? And in particular, if you want to say, what about this, you're welcome to do so.
Well, I agree with the premise. I mean, you're talking about a technology which is a huge driver of productivity, and interns is correct, but maybe slightly narrower. The consequence of the technology, even quite short term, for the Ministry of Defence, but for sort of warfighting capabilities more generally, is going to be revolutionary, because those interns aren't necessarily going to be the magical interns aren't necessarily going to be in back office. They can be on weapon systems. So you're automating human-like processing and putting it into lots of different places. And I think the economics of it will also mean that the current capabilities that the UK or other armed forces have will change. The relative importance, the relative capability you have will be revolutionized. So you may have the ability to have, we could talk about drones, for example, that can be controlled and coordinated much more accurately than they can at the moment. And of course, that's going to change things in the way that we see how warfighting is changing in Ukraine. And so for the UK, I think it's really important that we think hard about this shift in the potential balance of power. And one of the things I've struck listening to this is a very sort of slightly depressing conversation that's been going on, how difficult it is and how pessimistic we all are. But actually, it's a hugely disruptive technology, so why couldn't the UK take advantage of this? Everyone is starting more or less from a standing start with this. So there's some great opportunities as well as risks in what's happening.
And yeah, for me, it's about doing more with less. Whichever way we look at it, the 1,000 interns, the drone, whatever it is, the speed of iteration will increase and continue to increase. We're seeing that in Ukraine around electronic warfare. Things are changing on a weekly basis, where in the past they may have changed on months and years timescales. We need to be able to keep up with that. The speed of decision making will increase. And for where we are with our armed forces, we are not as big as we used to be. But where AI can bring us, it can bring us more mass, it can bring us more force power for less. We take away the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs from the humans, and AI allows us to give them to other people, keeping our people safe and increasing their ability to fight.
Cool. So Andrew, in response to the question, said why couldn't the UK take advantage of this, which is the next question. So thank you for teeing it up. So in working with the MOD, comparing that relationship with other allied nations and commercial customers, do you think the MOD is what's it like working with them? And do you sense that the MOD is set up to succeed in this, or are there major flaws that need to be addressed? Any one of you? Richard, do you want to start?
I don't necessarily believe there are flaws. I think the MOD is set up to deal with more older style procurement and delivery, and the commercial models will need revisiting. If we consider we're a software-driven business, you're a software-driven business, we all are here, changes measured in weeks. Existing programs with software update, larger businesses tend to charge government for a software update, whereas businesses like ours will drop a software update every 2 weeks, and that requires a different approach, a subscription model almost. The iPhone parallel is pretty similar here. That's where change needs to occur for businesses like ours, and for the speed of change to flourish.
Can I just quickly come in on the back of that? Have any of you had any involvement with Commercial X? Because the MOD have told us that's supposed to be more agile and it's supposed to be less risk averse in terms of defence procurement. Have you had any involvement with them? And is it working? Are they less risk averse? Is it more agile?
Yes, they are less risk averse, and yes, they are more agile. I would not understate the level of challenge that it takes to come from a hardware-based procurement system that takes decades to deliver something grey and made out of metal to then turn it into something that was out of date 10 seconds ago. And so the scale of challenge that Commercial X faces there is immense, and we at Palantir certainly have seen significant improvement in the iterative development of those procedures. Yes, we would always like to see things move faster, of course we would, but we are very pleased with the kind of the speed of those developments. What I would say to kind of the original question is that I believe that the MOD faces a kind of a set of interlocking obstacles to deploying AI in an operationally relevant sense. And you might expect me to say this working for a software and technology company, but we believe that those largely at their root are technically based. Those interlocking obstacles technically then interweave into commercial and then into capital. And you mentioned the kind of the performance of allies, and perhaps how has the MOD performed with respect to its allies. If we look to the Department of Defence, they ran a number of programs in the late noughties that worked out how to effectively acquire, accredit, assure, evaluate, deploy, monitor, and improve AI capabilities. And in doing so, essentially overcame their technical obstacles. And by doing that, Richard mentioned the kind of the speed in Ukraine at which we see the development of capabilities and the compression of that OODA loop. In doing so, in those programs in the late noughties, there are a number of them based around the rapid deployment of AI capabilities to the warfighter. In doing so, the Department of Defence essentially removed some of the commercial obstacles that these companies face, because the evaluation of those capabilities were taking place on days or weeks versus months and years. And so therefore the speed at which the Department of Defence could look at quantitative measures of evaluation to say that this model or this capability may be better than the baseline or may not be, was therefore rapidly compressed. And in doing so, then more and more kind of enterprises, whether they be primes, whether they be medium-sized or SMEs, were able to enter into this type of program. And in doing so, in removing, therefore, technical and commercial barriers, that in itself then allowed a significant amount of private capital to flow into the defence, and specifically defence AI industry in the United States, which since the late noughties, 2017-18 type time, has dramatically improved the level of funding available to these companies, and thus their ability to cross the valley of death. And so just to come back to your original question, it's to what it is like working with the MOD and how does it compare to her allies. There is huge opportunity to allow Commercial X to take that same approach to address those actual technical root cause obstacles, which in themselves should allow for the lowering of the commercial and capital obstacles also in the way.
You don't feel obliged to say you're happy not to?
It's been a relatively positive experience, as what I say, and I'd echo, I haven't disagreed with anything that my fellow panellists have said, nor do I disagree with what the first panel said about some of the problems. But increasing professionalisation of procurement processes and understanding what software is really important in all of this. And so the bits of MOD that embrace that are very positive for basically the advance of AI within the UK or the UK defence sector.
Just one last
and
question.
then Derek Twigge's going to come in.
Yep. And then that's me done. And this is just to Phil. Look, there's always an issue when an AI provider comes in to set up a service, which is that it depends on the data from the client. The data of the client goes into the AI provider, and it's the same with the MOD as any other part of government, and I suspect others. You referred to, the exact phrase was, allowing the clients to take decisions with their data. The way you operate, does it enable the clients to actually have flexibility about how their data is used and operated, or is there a risk that data, which is important and incredibly valuable commodity, gets into your black box and they can have sort of one line of answers from it, but if they can't tweak or play with that data, they get locked in and it can be a very expensive process? I don't want to misrepresent you, but that is a concern, I presume.
It's a common concern across the software industry, particularly in respect to working with government and in defence. The approach that I just mentioned is that if the MOD were to focus its considerable talent and opportunity and resources upon looking to remove those technical barriers, the platform type approach that was mentioned earlier, would give the MOD the ability to quantitatively evaluate the performance of models and or even kind of greater technologies or systems or platforms. And I say quantitatively, so rather than just dependent upon how good the sales pitch was or kind of whatever the kind of particular urgent operational requirement might be, but to test the particular model in not just one or two scenarios, but thousands across millions of pieces of data. That would allow the MOD to create a best-of-breed approach, ensuring that there is never a lock-in to whichever AI capability or software capability that was chosen. And in fact, the capabilities that are utilised are those that are most appropriate and effective at the task at hand. So it might be that a in-house model built in conjunction with the Defence AI Centre and one of the frontline commands is used for ISTAR type activities, perhaps through object detection or recognition through full motion video. It might be that then a third-party model is used to understand patterns of signals that might be emanating from electronic devices in the battlefield in Ukraine, and perhaps then that combined with a model from a partner, an ally like the United States, to then understand sentiment across social media type posts or whatever it may be in that regard. Taking each one of those capabilities and allowing them to be compared against essentially their competitors or other providers in that space would allow the MOD to break through the concept of black boxes without the manufacturer needing to disclose their source code, their intellectual property, their weights and biases on their models. It would allow the MOD to work out to say, yes, this one is very good in this setting, but not when it is of a desert terrain and the altitude is of X thousand feet for the drone or whatever it may be. So there are most certainly routes to breaking through the kind of perceived lock-in and black box of AI technologies that do stem from the kind of effective implementation of technical infrastructure.
Derek Twigg?
Can I just put maybe a different slant on Jeremy's question? Because you keep repeating the word speed. It seems apparent to me from the hearings we've had on this so far is that one of the, I won't say concerns, going back to your point about the opportunities here, is how does the MOD keep on top of that speed of change? I mean, given its record in the past in terms of just conventional weapons, in some of it being outdated by the time they've done it, completed it, technology's moved on, some of it's even been obsolete. I mean, how you know, because you've answered Jerry's question in a way saying, the MOD is doing really well, it's working hard, it's changing things. I mean, how does it keep on top of this sheer scale and speed of change in terms of software, data, artificial intelligence? How does it do? Is it doing it?
Might allow my Philip.
Yes.
I think
I mean, there was a reference to kind of agile ways of working, just thinking what is software, and I think it's true that people are in a sort of mindset where it's a 20-year program, and therefore it can all get a little bit flabby or difficult to track the individual kind of inputs. And I think part of it is making sure that you're, again, to come back to the procurement, is set up that you're regularly going to the market and that you're interested in getting incremental change. And then the other thing I would say is link up with the users better, because we're used to these large hardware programs in MOD. You're often very, very far away from the sailors or the soldiers or the pilots or the analysts. And these are people who love technology. Like, they use it all the time at home. So these are people who are very informed about what's going on and demand new features and would like new features. I understand that it's difficult within the secure environment, but I think the one frustration, I think, as a company, we've been working with MOD only 2 years, and we're really proud of all the things we've done, and it's gone really well. But the one thing we often stumble over is actually talking about our software solutions with the people who are going to use them. And if you harness that, I think that really, really accelerates change and really sort of builds up demand for the absolute state of the art for the particular problem that they want to solve.
I mean, it's a very important point, but so just a little opinion, or anyone can answer the question, but just to pin you down, how could we as a committee be assured or have the confidence that actually MOD are on top of this? What is it that we need to be looking at that needs to, the evidence, what is it that will give us some confidence that's happening?
It's quite, I'm probably not going to answer your question directly, and I apologise immediately. The way it's done now gives you that confidence, because someone will specify something down to the paint colour. Yeah. And then there's a whole industry around, I used to work for a major UK prime, answering those questions to prove to the MOD that we have given them exactly what they want.
There's also over-specification.
Yeah, well, yeah, so, and atomising everything. Where we need to be is in an 80-20, because 80% of the work's done in the last 20%. Yeah. And to co-develop with the end user allows us to do it. But in order for you to show whether the MOD are on top of it is it's more difficult in that regard. But that's the way that success will be achieved.
I think you will know that we have started to flip that balance of risk from commercial, financial, and into the potential of operational failure of not deploying AI, when you start to hear more about these programs that have, I don't want to say failed, but have come into difficulty of developing the software. The only way that software companies like ours are able to make progress in the field of software is to try something and find out that it doesn't work, and to then do that multiple times again and again. And I'm not suggesting that would need to take place at technology readiness level 9, i.e. on the battlefield. You would want to ensure that was the case at kind of much further down the maturity spectrum of these technologies. But to your original question as to how would you have the confidence in ensuring that the MOD was on top of this, I think one marker of success or metric for that progress will be seeing what were the things that didn't work. I think, coming back to some of the previous evidence that I believe it was Mr. Black raised last week from RAND, is that service personnel are not necessarily empowered to fail in these regards. And yet, if you went to speak to any UK, US, Western technology company, every one of their employees is almost certainly allowed to fail, because that is how software is developed. It is software development. And so I think there are certainly markers around allowing these programs to go utilize capital funds in a way that means that they're not necessarily throwing it all away, but a way that allows them to explore areas that may never have been thought of. because it's from there that we will find the kind of the once-in-a-lifetime type discoveries. And so I think there is some point there around seeing the flipping of commercial and financial risk to that of operational failure. What if we don't do this? We could fail upon these operations. And so therefore some of that increased risk tolerance in that regard may mean that we see that some of these programs perhaps are not quite as successful.
Thanks for that. We've just had news that there's an urgent question in the chamber at 12:30 with regards to defence equipment to Ukraine, so I think we might lose a lot of the committee at about 12:25. So if we can just keep that in mind as I hand over to Gavin Robson.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon. I wasn't here for the start of this session, but I think you've all fairly highlighted your experience with Commercial X and the relationships that you have and are important with the Ministry of Defence. Returning to the Defence AI Centre, and one of its functions or roles, its focus should be to encourage relationships between defence and the technology sector. Has it been effective? I don't mind who wishes to take up on this first, but have you found that role of the Defence AI Centre has worked, is working, or could do better?
So we, over the last 2 years, we've done quite a lot directly for the Defence AI Centre and helped with the process, with others, of setting it up. So, and in that, again, sort of 2 years, we saw a lot of progress. We've seen a lot of the building blocks that the other panel referred to being developed and tested, and new ways of working, a very positive attitude from people, and different attitude towards accessing data, training data, working at different levels of classification. Is it enough? Is it fast enough? Absolutely not, because the scale of the threats and the opportunities is so huge, as we have seen in Ukraine and elsewhere. But we found it positive. It really helped us as a British company develop capabilities which we can now use in other parts of the MOD. And so the balance is definitely more pro than con.
I think so. I agree with Andrew entirely. I believe the Defence AI Centre of the DAKE has significant part to play in the delivery of AI capabilities to the kind of the personnel on the front lines. I think it is important that we don't lose sight of the fact that AI is a general purpose embedded technology, and so therefore centralising to a specific department does have its risks. I believe again last week it was noted that who should the SRO for Defence be, and it's the Chief of the Defence Staff. It is that significant to the entirety of the department, and so whilst it has shown significant progress in its kind of nascent life, AI cannot get to the point of it essentially being outsourced. We wouldn't outsource, or I think it would be very unlikely that in governmental spheres we would think about outsourcing cloud computing or semiconductors or general purpose technologies. The challenge is going to be in the focus of this centralisation is going to be scale. Something that we see quite commonly across UK AI companies with whom we partner and leverage our technology to bring their solutions to MOD and to government, is that they feel as though there is not essentially the sharing of challenge from the MOD, i.e. that whilst there are multiple innovation frameworks and procedures that allow these companies to have access to MOD type problems, those challenges can often get stuck at technology readiness levels that essentially end at demonstrators, perhaps on Salisbury Plain or inside a laboratory type setting. And the challenge that the MOD faces, the DoD faces it too, the world faces it, is taking these innovations and allowing them to be scaled to the extent that they could be utilised by the entire fighting force of the MOD or of the UK. And it is very clear to us in our conversations with venture capitalists, with the kind of private capital class, or with even just the firms themselves, that there is enormous appetite for these companies and for the capital to be deployed in these types of problem sets. but they don't feel as though the scale of challenge that the UK faces is open and accessible and available to them to try and put their technology onto to help against it.
Thank you.
Nothing more to
Richard?
add. Scaling is the thing for us.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Richard Drax.
Good morning, gentlemen. Our evidence says that the UK does not have a defence ecosystem that encourages risk-taking or innovation in AI. How can the MOD better incentivise innovation and encourage investment in the sector? And you touched, I think, on the value of death. If I can sort of part two to the question is, how can defence bridge the gap between experimentation and fielding capability? So-called valley of death. This sounds very dramatic. But anyway, who would like to take that first? Andrew, do you want to fire up first?
I mean, trying to apply AI to real-world problems, as the panel have said, is part of this. The valley of death is exactly because things have stayed in the lab, and there is a disjoint. Again, I come back to the end users, the actual military users, between them and the innovation, the drivers of innovation in defence.
Really interrupt you. Are you saying that people who sort of make all this up, the backroom boys, call them what you will, and girls, are not talking to the potential users? So the users don't really know what's being done behind the scenes. Is that
crudely? Yes.
You're saying crudely, yeah.
Not enough a conversation, and there's not enough.
Better coordination would be.
Better coordination, or just valuing the frontline users more highly, involving them in the setting of the questions, not having that done as an academic exercise to say, is this interesting or not, but applying it to real world problems, I would say is one of the key things in all of this. I know we have to disagree a little bit about what we said. I'm not completely convinced that the answer is necessarily bringing in a lot of let me put it right. It may be that you can get that innovation from defence companies in other countries, but our experience is of a company that has worked in other sectors outside of defence and has come into defence. So there are huge amounts of learnings from healthcare, from retail, from wherever else that you can bring in. And one of the interesting things about AI is that it's being driven by it's a consumer. Everyone knows about AI. Everyone's got it in their phone. The innovation is coming from the consumer sector, and that's what's exciting and can be applied in the kind of military and defence sphere. So part of it, I think, is not just opening up to more foreign companies and foreign capital. That's got to be part of the innovation, but also just opening up to non-traditional defence suppliers.
Yes, I mean, so I think you will find that the senior leaders of the MOD are wholeheartedly on board with the idea of AI being an embedded technology that horizontally scales across their force. I think if you then were to go and meet operators and service personnel on the front line, so to speak, you would find a willing and kind of driven set of individuals that also want to use those technologies. It is the enabling functions in the middle, back to one of my earlier points around the technical foundations that we are lacking in the UK, that would allow the rapid deployment of those capabilities with the sponsorship of the senior leaders into the hands of the end users, essentially, on those front lines. And I think if we're able to get through those technical barriers, as I mentioned, that then breaks down some of the commercial and capital barriers. In terms of bridging the gap and incentivization and the investment of capital, I think that comes back to a previous answer that I mentioned, which is around allowing these companies to see that their technology could be used on something beyond an innovation sandbox. It could be, if it was proved to be successful in innovation sandbox, that it could then be used on the front lines within 6 months. every technology company that we work with in concert with at Palantir would say that they would desperately want their technology to be deployed in a way that helped the UK prosper, whether that be in a military sense, a health setting, commercially, whatever it may be. I think in order to incentivize that, shortening the time in which it takes for a company to say, look, I've got a great idea, I'm a spin out from a university, we're a group of friends, we made however it may come about, and allowing that 3-person spin out to take a technology that is then tested and evaluated and able to be deployed to make a difference. If we can put those opportunities in front of those plethora of companies that exist in the UK, we will very rapidly bridge that valley of death. We will attract that level of capital into those companies to then allow them to expand their offerings and allow the UK and the MOD to succeed.
Just to get the record, the MOD is not doing that. So if it's not getting to the front line, an idea, an innovation, something that's maybe slightly more risky, or whatever it is, it's not being experimented with on the front line by those on the front line. Is that what you're saying?
It does happen. It most certainly does happen, and it happens through the number of innovation frameworks and pathways that exist to allow private companies to bring their technologies to the MOD. However, if we look to the application of these technologies in Ukraine, that OODA loop takes hours and days rather than the kind of the months and years that it might take in a post-war type state versus the pre-war we're in now.
War tends to speed things up, doesn't it? I would suggest. Richard?
I think for me, it's around business models. We're currently set up for a business model that encourages slow speed because the margins we're allowing companies to make on large-scale defence projects are quite small in percentage. Therefore, people want to make money from this. We're companies, we're business. If the business model is different, where the smaller businesses like ours are happy to take more risks than the larger businesses, it will encourage investment, encourage new brains, will encourage new skills if people can see a way of growing their business and becoming successful. So getting the right business model that allows us to move from being the businesses that do the clever things in the bottom left-hand corner of scale in business to move to that larger business of scale makes a big difference.
Thank you. Jesse Norman.
Thank you very much. Jen, we've heard about the importance of the right platform or platforms, and we've explored the analysis or the analogy with iOS or the equivalent. What state is the MOD's platform for AI in at the moment? When will it be ready, and who's doing it?
It's hard to generalise because it is atomized in a good way because certain teams have certain aspects for what they need to be able to say.
Give me an example of a good one, an example of a bad or a less good one that's, as it were, in development. Well, just so we can be a bit more concrete. Yes. Otherwise, we're swimming around in general.
No, I agree with you, and I'm going to struggle to find a not good one because I can only talk about the ones we've worked on. So, a lot of the ISR platforms and a lot of the calculation and the AI that works behind that is very good because they are need-driven. In areas where the need isn't quite so great, it's not quite so developed.
So you will have developed the platform in that area,
or businesses such as
others will have, with to a commission set put by MOD under advice.
Yes, and I believe it's not uniform because the need is not uniform. The need right now, the need next week is different in different areas. I hope that helped.
It's for about 5% towards where I hope we would get to. Phil, do you want to have a shot, or Andrew?
Sure. So it really kind of is a question of what we define as doing well. In that, is that taking the capability and then delivering it to the warfighter? Is it exploring new state-of-the-art? Is it winning on the battlefield? And so I think to your very original question, I would say that the state for the UK is nascent. It reflects that of the fact that the DAKE has made significant strides over its first couple of years of existence, but is still in a nascent state. And there is some challenge in a as we've mentioned kind of in this committee already, in the kind of post-Levine world as to where does the ownership lie in driving that forward. We would certainly like to see much more embedding of AI across the services versus in a specific area. And so therefore we would like to see a little bit more around the idea that there is a place in which these capabilities, let's call them models, are developed and tested and evaluated and monitored. It is most likely that will take place in the DAKE, but due to its nascent state, that is still kind of being set up in that regard.
So you're kind of hinting at the incoherence argument that's being addressed by Neil earlier on.
Correct, yes.
Okay, that's helpful. Do you do at Palantir a kind of country-by-country scoring of how well advanced their AI is? I mean, you must know what good looks like and what bad looks like across Europe, for example.
I'm afraid to disappoint that we don't have scoring per se, but we do have a good understanding of what good looks like. And
you'll be thinking, are these folks ready for me to sell in, as I have done, my colleague has done successfully in another country? That would be the kind of situation you'll be thinking about.
And the MOD is absolutely ready to be able to be buying that type of capability.
You would regard the MOD at the moment, notwithstanding its nascent capability, as being at the top end of that?
I would regard it, notwithstanding its nascent capability, I would regard it as able to be buying these capabilities and putting them onto the front line, most certainly.
Whereas Estonia, for example, picking a name at random, might be further advanced?
Because of some very specific reasons as to how they're digitally developed. Obviously, the very obvious comparison for the United Kingdom is the United States, and my American colleagues would say that whilst significant advances have been made in the Department of Defense, referring back to some of those programs in the late noughties that I mentioned previously, is that there is still a significant amount of money that should be spent that is not being spent
within DoD,
within the Department of Defense, to uplift their software spend to at least 1% of their budget, which it is not currently.
Chair, do we have a second to go on to Andrew? I don't want to. Okay, lovely. Thank you.
I don't quite agree with, I think, the paradigm that is, or the similes and metaphors that we've been using about creating this platform. I think it's, so we as a company build the models, build the applications that sit on the platform, and sometimes we have to help out on the platform or work with companies such as Palantir in order that the platform exists or is stable in order for our work to happen. So that's how where we come from it. And so part of the way that you get the infrastructure in place is by building the models and using the models, and that again creates demand. And so I think our experience has been that if you try and solve every single problem sequentially, it'll take forever. So part of the solution is putting end-to-end AI solutions in place, showing that they work, and that then creates the demand for the infrastructure and the platforms to follow and to be built up as well. So I don't disagree with what others have said.
You're throwing the ingredients into the pot. You're seeing how good they're looking, and then you're tweaking and developing
if you bake some great cakes, then someone will pay for a new oven so you can bake more cakes.
Okay, we're in the world of metaphor overstretch. I think. Okay, but I think I'm broadly getting the point. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you, Derek Twigg.
Yeah. I think, Phil, you mentioned a few times is the non-traditional defence, so non-traditional companies and their access, basically. I mean, what are the barriers? What the sort of is really sort of holding back these non-traditional companies that could be doing things in defence?
There are a number. A couple have been mentioned already in this inquiry around clearances, around access to secure spaces, around access to data. And as I've mentioned, if if the MOD is able to address these technical infrastructure pieces to allow very rapidly a company to get close to those opportunities, perhaps with a middle level type clearance versus the highest levels that are required in some senses, that would then give much greater appetite for that company to say, yes, we're going to double down on this particular line of development in which we've got some new state of the art. And so the challenges certainly are around the infrastructure and the both technical and non-technical around, say, the clearances and access to secure facilities.
So do you think that's about mentality a problem in that we're actually potentially on a war footing, because with what's going on in the world, and we're actually, the MOD psyche hasn't got to that stage. It's sort of still working on a pre-Ukraine situation, and therefore we'd probably move quicker if where we are today compared to 2 years ago.
Yes, we no longer have the luxury of time in a pre-war state. I agree with the statements made previously in that the strategies are well developed in themselves as being strategies, but most of those capabilities that certainly were AI next, I can't remember them all specifically off the top of my head, are commercially available off the shelf today. We've mentioned the speed at which large language models have been developed. If you look last year at text to video, it created kind of laughably bad capabilities that clearly you could tell weren't real. Just a couple of weeks ago, a leading AI firm released a model that makes completely human realistic capability. And so if you then combine the speed with which the technology is developing and the speed at which the observe, orient, decide, act loops are needing to take place on the battlefield in Ukraine, there is somewhat of a disconnect between the pace at which the MOD must move to best take advantage of these capabilities, bring in the significant expertise that exists within the UK market and industry, and deploy them onto operationally critical and relevant problem sets.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
Just one facet of it that I was going to say, just take security clearance for individuals. If that can't be done quickly, then you can't have a non-traditional supplier provide a solution. It's as simple as that. And it must be a solvable problem to change how we do vetting to allow people to come into it with a few hours of work to get their clearances rather than weeks and months.
What could be critical developments really in terms
of moving
forward?
Massively critical. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you very much. Just one final question from myself. How can the MOD turn AUKUS into a success story for UK AI? Anyone?
I can do.
Or can it not?
So I'd like to draw upon the movement away from the previous accreditation scheme towards secure by design. I think there is significant opportunity to exploit the secure by design framework to allow essentially a build once, ship many type approach. And so if you imagine that these small to medium enterprises that we've been talking about, perhaps some of those companies that are struggling to gain access to these problems due to clearances or facility access, if they could utilize secure by design and essentially be accredited in the UK once and therefore applicable in the United States and in Australia on very serious critical operational defense problems, that is a huge opportunity that a whole number of these very innovative, novel, nimble, agile companies would want their technology to be deployed upon. So therefore the opportunity is immense. The danger is that we take some of the failings or issues with commercial and procedural and financial risk that exist in each of those nations and combine them.
The worst of all worlds.
Exactly. And therefore get nervousness around rather than making an agile technology decision, instead you're making a tripartite decision for technology across the board, and therefore losing the balance of risk against operations.
Did Andrew or Richard, did you want to add anything to that?
I think the same could be said for export control and export rules. If we've started to see movement, certainly between the States and Australia, around ITAR, for example, any levels of acceleration around there, again, to allow us, well, any business really, to do once, use many, with less paperwork and less barriers, while still remaining secure, I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, also just showcase the good stuff that's happened to the Australians and listen to what they've got. The very simple stuff of just being proud of what we've got and allowing them to reuse it quickly and cheaply. That's put benefit in the hands of the Australians, and then that, again, will be a positive thing to do.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much to our witnesses, committee and staff, and I'll end the committee session now. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.